views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. After last week's show about the Jerome Avenue rezoning that featured two council members who ultimately supported the plan and were behind the $189 million that's designated for local development and infrastructure improvements, we were contacted by tonight's guests who are among the community leaders who have opposed the plan. And they asked to come on the program to explain their point of view. So because, as you well know, BronxNet is your voice, your views, and your vision, we of course said yes. So tonight we review the plan to rezone Jerome Avenue for new housing and commercial development with two leaders of the movement that have opposed the plan. Please join me in welcoming from two of the organizations that have really worked hard on this, and that is CASA, the Community Action for Safe Apartments, and they're also on the steering committee of the Bronx Coalition for a Community Vision, which includes faith-based labor, trade, and Jerome Auto communities. It is Carmen Vega Rivera. Nice to have you back on the show.
Thank you.
And also Fitzroy Christian. Nice to have you back on the show.
Nice being with you again, Carmen.
Ms. Vega Rivera, let's start with you. Much like I started with the council members who are on, it's been a long road. Talk to me about your initial impressions of when you heard this was going to happen and where you are at now. Has anything changed? Do you feel like the plan has been formed somewhat to more so to your liking?
When I heard about the decision, I wasn't surprised. I sort of, all along the 3 years of planning, felt with the city council reps that are representing us, actually going to hear the voices of the community leaders such as myself, Fitzroy, and many, many others who live in the community, know what we want, have stood by when the Bronx was going through its many metaphors, changing. And after seeing that and knowing what was best for the community, I, from my perspective, knew what I wanted in terms of me staying within the community. When the decision was reached at City Council, I was not surprised. I was actually dismayed and frustrated that the voices of thousands of us within the last 3 years that went through forums, visioning sessions, communicating about what we needed as a local community based on our housing needs, based on jobs, based on businesses, based on protecting ourselves, was not heard by the city. In doing the plan and creating the platform for a community vision, Bronx Coalition for a Community Vision's platform with the 4 principles: strong anti-displacement, anti-harassment policies, real affordable housing for those that are in the community, not for those that are coming, real community engagement, as well as good job and local hire. We spent a lot of time discussing those 4 principles and many demands that came out of those 4 principles to ultimately get to where we were in reducing the number of demands and focusing on just a few and still not getting what was really needed for the community leaves a bitter taste in my mouth as to who are our elected officials representing. Did they hear our voice? Did the city actually listen with the many multiple meetings that we had and discussions about what's needed, why it's needed, and why it's a priority?
When I asked both council members who were here, and it's Vanessa Gibson and Fernando Cabrera, about people who still disagreed, they had both said, in essence, thank you, because they felt what you had said helped them mold what they did. There is a certificate of non-harassment. There are other infrastructure things put in place to improve parks. There are 2 new schools, and they both acknowledge that maybe, though, in fact, I think it's likely those things would not have been in the plan if you and your colleagues and other people in the community had not stood up and made the points that you make. So did they really not listen, or not listen to the degree you wanted them
The
to?
policies that I would say, yes, I agree with them, that the right to counsel, which is providing low-income tenants the right to have legal representation in housing court, the certificate of no harassment, preventing landlords who are harassing tenants from doing demolition or any major repairs in their building, and as well as the safety training for local hires in terms of construction workers. Those are great. They were one. But those are citywide, and they're not the magic wand of preventing displacement. So that was the work that we did as organizing groups, working with labor, faith-based, and other tenant organizing to get the right to counsel, to get the certificate of no harassment, and to get 1447 passed. So yes, were those great wins? Most definitely, I agree with them. But that's not the issue on the table right now when it comes to the Jerome Avenue rezoning.
Is there a magic wand? And what I contended with them, and I presented it directly, is that in a plan like this, there's bound to be some displacement. Is there a magic wand that could prevent it on both the residential and the commercial side? Or is once a decision that a zoning was going to happen, there's going to be some displacement?
Some displacement.
The right to counsel.
We'll let Mr.
Right.
Christian weigh in.
Okay.
too. Go ahead. You
Okay.
looked like you wanted a response. So
Yeah,
we'll give you a
because
chance.
what you said from what they told you, it is not, it's not a real truth, in that it is their narrative which is not explaining what is happening. When the mayor announced that he was going to be doing the upzoning, immediately that, especially since it was for residential construction, it means that the value of the properties in that area immediately rose overnight, because residential use of land is the most profitable use of the land. What the mayor and the administration in the whole did not do, or what they refused to do, was to accept the fact that there was tremendous pressure being brought on rent-stabilized tenants who were being forced out. Even though we won the right to counsel, the 2 zip codes that are covered in this upzoning, where tenants are being brought to court or being scared out of their apartments, are not a part of that. The tenants there are not protected under the right to counsel. So that speaking or saying that they have considered that the tenants in the rent-stabilized apartments are not going to be displaced because there are measures in place to protect them, it is not really true. The court records indicate that there is even an increase numbers of people who are going to court from these 2 zip codes, and not a reduction, because they're not protected. The developers and the landlords who own property in this area are rushing to get these people out.
And not only in the area, there's also indirect
It's a
displacement.
large, sure, we know it is a large area. I'm going to ask you each to, and maybe you have the same vision or not. Give me a vision of, listen, there are areas in that stretch of Jerome Avenue, and then of course the blocks on either side of it, that could really use some help, number one, and number two, certainly the city could use more housing. Give me a way that we could increase kind of the profile of the people, the outlook of the people, the economic standing of the people who live there, and not displace anybody, and still improve the community, bring even some money in from the outside because there's not sufficient income within the area to make financial improvements. Give me a vision on how that could have or should have worked as opposed to the plan we got.
It's happening. It is happening already. If you look around the Bronx right now, you see a massive amount of construction taking place. Those are not a part of the upzoning. I think the number he said was 5,200 new apartments. That was
The existing?
You're talking about on
Yeah.
this plan?
No.
This is
In
outside
general.
of
Outside of the
yes. So
rezoning.
what we're
we
saying
know
is
there has been certainly a development boom throughout the borough of the Bronx. Nobody
without
would deny
the
that,
upzoning.
right?
So why can it not continue? Because we know historically in New York, every time there's an upzoning, it's in a community of brown and
So how would you have designed an improvement plan for this neighborhood, for this area, without doing the upzoning? I mean, you've got all those auto body shops that are there.
72% of whom are going to be displaced.
Okay, you've got. I'm not going to dispute the number. You've
No,
got
that's the
all-
city's number.
I understand.
Actually,
Okay.
it went up. It's higher now.
Okay. But you've got all the auto body shops there. Many of the buildings are substandard. I know, Carmen, you spend enough time wrestling over the housing and the issues with housing in that neighborhood. How can you improve that community in a different way that wouldn't displace people and that would improve the lives of the people in that community?
You could have created clusters for the auto workers where you could do standalone buildings with multiple floors, where you do, one-stop shopping. I use the auto industry. I drive. I've used Jerome Avenue many times, and I'm able to get various prices. It would be great from someone that drives, we both drive, is to go to a center place, multiple places, where one can shop for getting their glass replaced, body work, and other pieces that one would need, other services one would need to get their cars up to maintenance or whatever it may be. But that's not going to be the case now.
Well, we know that. I'm curious about that because among the things that seem to get lost is a different vision. So your vision would have been, if I'm understanding correctly, to build larger structures and maybe have them on different floors.
One option.
Right, and then you would have that property that you took down, and then you would take those auto body shops and put
relocate
those in
them
those
into that new building. yes.
into that new building.
And give them, exactly, and give them new equipment, train them wherever their training is necessary. Remember, by taking the auto workers out, we're losing a core group of middle-income folks. These are not people making retail dollars. These are people making, on the average, $47,000. When we lose approximately 1,000 auto workers, most of them new immigrants, immigrants from other countries, primarily the Dominican Republic, where are they going to get another job that will suffice that income range that they are used to and accustomed to, that has helped to sustain the community? I don't see them. If they're being displaced and they're getting money to move somewhere else, I don't know where the somewhere else is. Someone needed to think through, and there were promises made that they will remain in the community, and that is not happening as of now.
We certainly saw that with Willets Point,
Yeah.
where they were promised to be able to move, and then and it actually was in the Bronx they were supposed to move to, and
Hunts
then
Point.
that fell through. Councilmember Gibson said there would be deep affordability, low-income housing, and housing for seniors, and she was very firm about her belief that that's the case. I don't know who wants to respond.
I'm going to take a shot at it, and then I'm going to have Fitzroy. But housing for senior, I happen to be what I consider a young senior. That housing was already
We're
in
not
place.
counting years.
As
Go ahead.
Fitzroy said, it's under 20. But that housing idea for seniors was already in place before the passing of this rezoning or in the conversation of rezoning Jerome Avenue. Right now, 45% of the community members make under $20,000, families. And yet, the plan that's been passed is looking at folks that are making the mandatory inclusionary housing, which is around $60,000. That is more than 2.5 times the amount of what people are making. I thought in the plan that we had created and the many conversations that we, in fact, were going to look at the needs, the dire needs of the residents in the community, 4 and 5, which we did. We did an assessment, we did analysis, we came up with numbers, we showed them to the city, we showed them to our city council reps, and that the actual housing, at least 50% of the stock, would be for those folks making under the $20,000 or the 30% AMI. Where are folks who are making 30% or under going to be able to find housing in that range when the housing is going to be mandatory inclusionary housing numbers, and they're not going to be able to afford it? So here comes the issue of displacement. When that rent, you can't find it, and you get rent increase because your landlord is deciding land value has gone up, here's an opportunity to bring folks with more disposable income to take over your apartment. They're going to do mandatory MCIs, major capital improvements, and they're going to find other ways and means of displacing the existing residents.
There is a non-harassment provision that, as I understand, lasts for 2 years. If you saw the show, I guess you know that I asked both council members what happens after 2 years. They both said, we're not going anywhere, and we're going to continue to work with developers and fight on behalf of those tenants. That's not a sufficient answer for,
No.
for you.
I'll
Go
tell
ahead,
you
Mr.
why
Christian.
it is not a sufficient answer. We heard that from Bloomberg. We heard that in Harlem. We heard it in Williamsbridge. We heard it in Greenpoint. We heard it in Park Slope. My problem is that in white areas, there are in place improvements. They go into, let us say, 59th Street. I'm just using that as an
Sure.
example. They will improve the parks. They will give you new schools. They will do this streetscaping. They give you everything. There is no change.
There's no trade-off. is
There's
what
no
you're
There's no
saying.
trade-off. When they come to communities of color, they have a different attitude. They're saying, we need mixed income communities. Already here in the Bronx, the economic reality is very, very mixed. As Carmen was just saying, we have people who make the auto workers who are making between $40,000 and $50,000 a year. There are professionals who are making in the high doubles and low three-digit salaries. We, those of us who are in either of those two groups, can afford the housing here.
You
But
know,
they're building for them, but not for the most vulnerable, the people who make 30% of the AMI or less, who cannot afford it already.
do you think that there's really any neighborhood in the Bronx or in the city right now that could say we'd like 2 new schools and get the $100 million allocated to build 2 new
But
schools?
when we've been asking
and the
for
same
that,
thing
Gary,
with,
we have been asking for that for years.
yeah, but no, I'm just
They're only
addressing.
bringing it now as a kind of a tease.
Yeah, but those will be services and investments that should be in place. That
Exactly.
shouldn't be the carrot that's swung in front of your face to make decisions as a trade-off to have the rezoning go through.
I was only addressing the fact that, or not the fact, excuse me, the allegation that some neighborhoods would get that anyway and others wouldn't. I don't think there's any neighborhood in the city right now, because everybody's complaining about school seats, that can say, hey, we'd like to get $100 million to build 2 new schools, and it's good to get the news. People of color, white, whatever. So, you know, I don't think that would have happened. And the same thing happened with...
Except, Gary, let me interrupt you here.
Sure.
We've been asking for that for 10, 15, 20 years now.
Yeah, no...
Even before this current administration, we've been asking for more seats
Well,
because of the overcrowding.
Yeah,
And this was something that was in the pipeline before. So bringing it on now to say, okay, we're going to give it to you now, it is not because you're giving it to us now. It's something that has been in the pipeline for the past 10, 12 years, where a lot of groups, including Parent Action Committee, which is a part of the New Settlement family, they have been pushing for that for a long time as well.
We have terrible poverty in the Bronx. It
Yes.
is like a bacteria. It is like a disease. You can look at, I mean, we see evidence of it everywhere you turn in so many of our neighborhoods. It's hard to ignore. Is there a way to take those people who only make $20,000 and help them make more than that so that they could afford better housing, better amenities, and things like that, so that we move them out of this?
Yes.
And what is that?
One way is to make sure that the employment level rises.
Available jobs is what you're alleging. Yeah.
And also
I'm training for judges.
And also the rates that they're being paid. If you are working in retail, making $8 an hour is not going to suffice. But if you're trained to go into management and you're trained to go into another area, then that rate may go up. But we also can't put it on, there are lots of other issues affecting the community to say, let's get rid of, and I wouldn't call our people those people. I would say that these are folks that are struggling. whether they're new immigrants, whether they were born and raised here, that for some reason or another fell through the wayside with the education system, didn't have vocational training, which I'm sure if we would look at schools and redesign schools, and I was hoping to hear that schools would be redesigned so there's more vocational training so that people leave as, electricians, plumbers, and then they can have a viable, good income that sustains themselves and their family along with the community. But we focus a lot on just the academics, and then we lose sight of people having vocations that they need in order to root themselves up so that they have a better life. But in our community, I would say yes, but that's not as easy and as, you can't just say, let's just get this group of our people up to this level that easily. We have to take into account what are the factors and implications that are preventing them from moving forward. And how do we, build this in? Do we build it with the adults already in the family? Do we build it with their children in terms of, education? And I could see, again, vocational training for the community to uplift them. But there's so many other barriers. In order for you to get a trade job, in many instances, you have to have an education, at least a minimum high school graduation or a GED.
So let me ask you this, again, just taking a step back. If you add 2 more schools and provide more school seats, and you say that it should have been done earlier, I'm not going to dispute that. If you improve the parks, what they said last week, that there would be local hiring provisions in every contract, so that for the first time that I can remember sitting in this seat, people of the Bronx will actually get jobs that are available in the construction jobs in our communities. And one of the things I heard was that we could work with some of the auto commercial repair shops and have those people better trained so that they can get management jobs. Does that not satisfy what you're saying?
I'm going to speak about
You
the
and
trades,
then
very quickly, and I'm going to give
Sure.
the rest. But, hearing from the labor and trades, according to them, and I didn't see anything in the plan that ensures that construction jobs are going to go to local residents.
It's what I heard last week.
What
that
we heard and what is in the plan, and someone then has
said
to
local
break it
hiring
down.
provisions in every contract that comes through.
According
is
to
what
labor
is the
and trade,
quote.
it's not in there,
mandatory.
nor is there any adequate training to get those jobs. And so there's a big push for apprenticeship jobs, where you actually get the training, you get the safety training, you get the support, you get a wage as you're being trained, and then you get placed in the jobs. But in the plan, I did not see anything that states that they're going to ensure that construction jobs go to local residents.
As a matter of fact,
that's an informational thing and a credibility gap that I can't at the moment verify one way or the other. I'm just presenting what we heard. Go ahead.
Right. Under the mandatory inclusionary housing plan that the mayor had passed recently, he did make some provision for the developers to use local hire, but it is an option that they have. It is not mandatory.
Right.
Right? They're saying if you want city dollars, you should be making sure that they're local people who are taking those jobs. It is not a law unless it happened and we have not been informed of it. It is not a law and it is not mandatory where these developers must use a certain percentage of people locally. That is not there. When I spoke with some of the labor folks last week and in preparation for this show this evening, they said that there is nothing, no commitments,
that
nothing.
verifies it.
Yes.
We're almost out of time.
Okay.
What happens now? Now, I don't know if either of you were there, but apparently people were removed because they were protesting at the city council. There certainly still seems to be disagreement about what ought to happen. It was passed.
Yes.
The dialogue is interesting. Maybe you're making valid points. We'll let the people of the Bronx judge that. But what would happen, or what could happen, or what can happen now that would make you, and then we'll ask you the same question. We'll start with you, Mr. Christian, if you would.
What would make me happy is for...
Because you're not going to be able to overturn that vote
No.
at this point. Certainly
No.
that's not happening.
We have already lost that battle, right? But there is still opportunities. There's still opportunities for the administration in one part, and for the city council, particularly Vanessa Gibson and Fernando Cabrera, to sit with us honestly, with the coalition, and say, okay, we are going to have the rezoning. It's already passed. That's a given. you did not get anything that you were asking for.
Well,
okay, you didn't get much of what you asked for.
Some of what you were asking,
Okay.
yeah.
So what can we do going forward? What is it that you think that we can do?
And what would your answer be?
One, we want to make sure that the community is involved in an oversight of all of the programs and everything that is said is going to happen. Now, we are monitoring the Certificate of No Harassment. Our organizations, Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy Association, CASA, Mothers on the Move, we are on the ground working with tenants. We know what is happening in the buildings.
Now, if I can just interject, I had asked them specifically about monitoring this to make sure the things that they were alleging came true, and they talked about ongoing monitoring, all different kinds of monitoring. Are you saying you'd like to have greater input into that or greater oversight? Into
Exactly, because we know what happens when the city is monitoring itself.
We want to make sure that the community members,
No,
stakeholders.
I'm sorry, you said that and I started to laugh because, yes, I do know.
Okay.
I've been sitting in this seat too long. Go ahead.
So we want to make sure that when we say we, it's the stakeholders, tenants, auto workers,
labor.
small businesses, laborers, and others is sitting at the table making decisions for ourselves. We are continuing to meet. Our next meeting is this Thursday, April 5th. So the Bronx Coalition for Community Vision's rezoning meeting is going to happen at 1501 Jerome Avenue.
Which is?
This Thursday, April 5th.
Where is 1501 Jerome?
It's between 172nd Street East and Goble Street. It
There's
is
a
the
new
new
apartments
settlement.
campus.
Right. It is the new settlement community center
So,
on the
just-
second floor, and
we'll
there will
repeat
be
that. So it's June 5th, April 5th?
April 5th from 6 to 8 p.m. at 1501 Jerome Avenue, and there's food, interpretation, and childcare.
Okay.
And it's open to the public.
I'm going to tell you both something that I don't have to tell you. First of all, of course, thank you so much for your interest and your staying with it. And I hope you'll still continue to fight
Yeah,
for
we're
the
gonna be
borough.
there.
We're not
all-
going anywhere. We're invested in our community.
As I said, that was from the
Yeah.
Department of Redundancy Department. But we always appreciate your input into our program. Fitzroy
welcome.
Christian, thank you. Carmen Vega Rivera, thank you.
Thank you for having
And,
us.
as I said, I don't have to tell them keep fighting for the Bronx.
Can I say this, Gary, just before
quick,
you
sure.
close? Yes. And we are also asking the community to become involved. We are having our second annual basketball tournament in April.
It's all on your Facebook page,
Yes.
right? The
Yes.
CASA New Settlement Facebook page.
Yep.
If you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, email them to us at BronxTalk@BronxNet.org. You send a tweet at BronxTalk or post them on our Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. You can check out the archives at BronxNet.org. BronxTalk is found by the Watch menu on the new BronxNet website. Next week, speaking of elected officials, we will have the debate in the special election for the 32nd Senatorial District, and then on the 16th, the debate for the 80th Assembly District. We thank our producer is Helen, our director is William. We thank them, we thank you, and we will see you next week. Good night.